Okay. Hi, everybody. It's the Average Joe Sports Show live edition on a Sunday morning. It is episode number 50 after game number 1 of the 2024 campaign for the Nebraska football team, a 40-7 victor over UTEP. So the 2024 campaign is off to a good start. I'm Bill Doleman. Elijah Herbel is here, and Gary Sharp is also with us, and Chris Schmidt's being a good boy. Probably coming back from church right about now. Might have done a little extra potluck in the fellowship hall, but he will be joining us as well. Great to have you with us live. Would love to hear your comments. If you want to drop them in the chat, wherever it is that you might be watching the Average Joe Sports Show. So we will be doing some live shows throughout the course of the season, be it Sunday morning, but probably Sunday night, so we can also talk about the NFL shows. But we are here on this Labor Day weekend to take a look back at yesterday, and, we might peek ahead. I got to look at the schedule. Nebraska plays again next week. We might take a look ahead to game 2 on the slate as well. But, Gary, what did you think game 1, Nebraska, UTEP, and the win yesterday?
I thought it was the perfect opponent, and it was the perfect outcome. Don't overthink the game. UTEP is UTEP. But I said yesterday, and I said all week long, and the last time we were together, guys, midweek, yesterday was about Nebraska, to do Nebraska things. And not worry about whether the opponent was really, really good or not so good, but just work on Nebraska things. And I think if you are looking for the perfect opponent, the perfect outcome, and things still to work on, but you also got to play a lot of guys and got to do things that kind of validated how you were feeling coming into the season, I think for where Nebraska football is, guys, you couldn't ask for a better Saturday to open up the 24 season than Nebraska got yesterday. And if you look around the landscape of college football, there were a lot of teams that are above Nebraska that I thought danced with their much less, inferior opponent for a lot longer than you would think before they turned on the gas. Man, Nebraska, that game was over at halftime. Nebraska hasn't had a game like that, boys, since 2021 when they were blowing out Northwestern at the break. Remember that way back in that season? That's a long time ago. So great day for Nebraska. Great game to use to get ready for what's coming up next week.
I will run gassers. I apologize for the tardiness.
You had an extra helping a green bean casserole in the fellowship hall potluck, so we understand. Mama made you go to church. That's fine, and you should, and I will later. But nevertheless, great to have Schmitty joining us here.
Mama's 50. Junior, just for the record, at Christ Lincoln, it was the Johnny Cash sermon, and walking the line was the theme. And how about the line play yesterday?
Wow.
That was a decent segue. I do want to say, first off, I know there's at least one person out there right now with one earbud in the ear in the church chapel. They went to the late service today because they got after it last night. And the pastor is hopping up on stage right about now, and they're seeing Average Joe's Sports Show is live. Let's throw an earbud in, try to hide it from the wife. I know someone out there is.
Yep, good possibility.
Yeah, possibly the old Homer Simpson tribute for sure. But guys, it was Dion. We love potluck as well. It was all good. The ceremonial post game Guinness with Doleman last night was tasty. It was fun, and then I got home about 11:30 and grilled a couple tomahawk pork chops, brothers. So it was
at 11:30 at night.
Yeah, I just turned the patio light on, kept the beasts downstairs. What? Mama was snoring away.
Why'd you say I was hungover? I just woke up late.
No, I wasn't. I didn't get after it. You guys have all seen me get after it, and I was a good boy last night.
He was well behaved, reasonably.
It's a hell of a bluff if you are hungover and slept in late to throw on the collared shirt and to take a shower and do your hair and make everything look nice. One hell of a bluff.
Through with the act. Yeah.
Hey, speaking of being juiced up, kudos to the Nebraska fans, because that stadium for the opener for 2024. That was pretty good. I mean, we've all talked around and around about this upcoming Saturday night, but I thought for game number 1, man, that there was, guys, it's different in Lincoln. Okay, whether it be the football that we're watching compared to the past 6, 7, 8 years, or just like you walk around Lincoln yesterday, the confidence. The head coach is very confident. He jokes about his team, and that lets me know he likes this team, and he can do that with this team of, like taking a little jab at him, but it's funny, like he did in the post game. But he's been confident. You get the sense that Nebraska fans, for the first time in a while, like their football team. And they brought it yesterday at the beginning of the game. And for the most part, except for the students who, I get it, we were all one of those students one time, they stayed. Again, great opener for Nebraska. You couldn't ask for anything better than yesterday.
It was absolute fun to see the mood. You get downtown, you see folks bumping around, wearing their red and white striped overalls. And then to see that joint packed 25, 30 minutes ahead of kickoff. And that's something that you've grown to expect for a while, but it's not always been the case. Here we go again, that mindset, what's going to go wrong. I loved the defense taking and seizing momentum back on that safety. I loved that. And then things were okay. You had a little bit of a storm cloud, and the defense woke up after the quick drive, 38 seconds, touchdown. And you got a couple of takeaways. You have a run game and I thought, Satterfield's been questioned a lot. The quarterback helps with his play sheet for sure, but I thought there was really good rhythm. I thought he stuck with what worked for a while, and I thought he went to his guys to go make some plays. The portal wideouts, and I know we'll get into all of this, but just a quick overview. I mean, man, not only the ball placement, but the execution of an Aor and Banks. That was fun. That was fun to watch. That was fun to watch if you're a Nebraska fan yesterday.
I want to go back to the crowd. That crowd, Nebraska fans, have been waiting since the tweet came out in early December that Dylan Raiola might flip from Georgia. Because that came after a couple of weeks after Nebraska had the heartbreaking loss to Iowa. Not going bowling again, no holiday plans. You had another 13-10 last-second loss, and a couple of weeks later, there's a tweet that this might happen. And we go through the song and dance for a couple of weeks, and we get to the end of December, and the kid commits. I don't want to put it all on him, but let's face it, he's a game changer. And I'm not just a game, but I'm just the mentality and everything that he has given to Nebraska, the shot in the arm, all those cliches. So that was really 8-9 months of pent up excitement. He delivered during the spring, had a nice spring game. He said all the right things. He's accorded himself well. Players like him. He's a good leader. And then he went out and performed the way that he did. But look, what happened yesterday in the leading up to the kickoff was birthed back in December. When they said he might come, and when he decided to come to Nebraska, they were all ready for that. And it's like we talked about, I mentioned the other day, this really has to be kind of a year 3 for Matt Rule. And I think Nebraska fans have the excitement of we have taken a gigantic leap forward. And the way they performed in the first half, and the students were gone by the third quarter. Half of them were probably playing. That's how many people played. But the atmosphere on Saturday night now with Colorado coming, I think is going to be pretty special. It'll be a memorable night in that regard.
And if the count I saw was correct, Bill, you mentioned how many guys played. I saw it on Twitter last night. Was it Sean Callahan? I think said over 100 Huskers.
106.
Wow,
that's great.
When was the last time you saw that?
Probably when Pacific came to town back in the 1980s, and Nebraska gave him $500,000 for coming, and you took the check and then dropped the program.
Or USC 07 the wrong way.
Yeah, but it has been a while since Nebraska in a win got to play that many guys, and Rule brought it up in the post game. And for all of us that have been around or have friends that are the 103rd guy on a roster, that's a big deal, man. Mm-hmm. Because I was there, when I was in high school, I looked at the schedule and I was like, you know what, we might blow that team out. I might get to play. And then if they struggled and you didn't get to play, you'd be like, oh man, screw Mark DeBrava, which I still hold against him. But it's like a big deal. Those guys got to play, even if you got to play like 5 snaps. But the one thing I do like that they did with that, in playing 106, they started the rotation early. And so a lot of those second team and third teamers, guys, they got valuable reps. And I will go a step further. They look like they belong. When Nebraska started to substitute yesterday, it didn't get helter-skelter. It didn't look like, oh, my God, they just emptied the bench, and it is just wild, wild west out here. Those guys continue to play pretty well. Like, I thought Harburg looked different. Gramstad got into the game. I think that's another key, like, put that in the back of your head. They emptied the bench, but they didn't look like they had emptied the bench, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the one thing that stood out to me from starters to backups to third stringers on my rewatch last night that I noticed live, but it really stood out to me whenever I went back and watched the game again, was the violence that the entire team played with. Not just starters, not just defense. You saw it from the offensive line. You saw it from the running backs. You saw it from the tight ends at times. But you saw it from the first stringers, the second stringers. The broadcast crew, Brock Heward even made a mention of it whenever Smith Flores came and blew up a play in the fourth quarter. He said, man, they're emptying the bench. They got guys named 81 that are playing to the same, or linebackers that are number 81 that are playing to that same standard. Like, it's true. You saw it throughout the culture that Matt Rule has built, and I don't want to anoint the culture after one game, but you saw it throughout the entire team that what Matt Rule's been preaching, being the most physical team, being the most violent team, it's RDV, relentless, determined, violent. It's one of the things they preach day in, day out in that program. You saw the violence of that football team yesterday. And I do think what we saw from UTEP was not a great football team. It's Scotty Walden in year one of a rebuild. But what I saw from Nebraska was a team that from the starters to the backups to the third stringers, everyone played to a standard, and that standard was violence, and I love that.
Choosing violence on a Saturday. You gotta love it. Moonbot checking in. I was drunk singing and playing loud music for hours in celebration. My neighbors probably hate me now. Moonbot, you keep playing There Is No Place Like Nebraska. I about cried, grown man tears, seeing them convert second and third. Pat checks in. That was subtle. That was fun. That was important on that opening drive. You get a penalty, and forgive me, you had a penalty.
A legal blindside block on the opening kickoff. I thought the season was going to be over there. So Nebraska, nice job coming back.
Well, and then you had the offensive. It was it a false start followed by offensive pass interference? You had the false start on first down, and then on second down, you had Fedoni called for the offensive pass interference. I rewatched it. He absolutely interfered. So no conspiracy theories there. He was so early blocking a dude. He had the dude pretty much driven into the ground before the pass was even thrown. Anyway, I digress.
It was violent.
To see them go 2nd and 30 in the confidence that Raiola had. I mean, the first throw, somewhat easy for a guy of Raiola's stature, like feathered it over the defender into the waiting arms of Banks. You more than cut it in half. But then the sidearm slinger on 3rd and 10, getting it over the middle of the field to Nayor, a thing of beauty. That was the moment. I think a lot of people in the press box said, okay, Nebraska's got a guy here. And I don't think that was too early to anoint, but like looking around the press box, everyone up there was like, okay, yeah, that this is what was advertised. And Dylan Raiola is already performing up to advertisement. It was fantastic.
Line is out for Nebraska, Colorado, -6.5, Big Red.
You said 6.5?
6.5. Husker Game Day putting that out on Twitter. And we'll see, man.
That's pretty big, if you ask me.
Yeah.
I do think that's kind of a big line for Nebraska, Colorado, and as much as everybody builds this game up to be and all that, and the rivalry game. And I think a touchdown, I think that's a lot.
Well, we'll see. The atmosphere is going to be helpful.
I do have concerns with Nebraska's ability to cover that, win the football game. I walk out feeling encouraged, as Gary and I mentioned, like off the air, briefly watching the Texas A&M Notre Dame game. I know it's a different level of competition. Those two teams are very good, and I don't think UTEP is going to be extremely good this year. but Nebraska passed the eye test a lot more. And again, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say like Nebraska's the better football team, but in a week 1 performance, Nebraska looked a lot more impressive. But I still have concerns with this football team. And the one big concern I have is like, I think the defense wasn't showing too much yesterday from a schematic point of view. I don't think they were going out there and showing a lot. I think there's a lot of base coverage, not a lot of blitzing. Didn't quite look like a Tony White defense.
It was more on defense and offense, yep.
But I still have like the defensive back room, like Jimmy Horn against Malcolm Hartzog. That's a concerning matchup if that's what it's going to be. Like I think we mentioned yesterday, like Tommy Hill's got a chance to make a lot of money in that Colorado game because he's going to be matched up with Travis Hunter. But across the board in that defensive back room, I think there's some matchups that Colorado can take advantage of. It's going to come down to Nebraska's pass rush being able to get home and make Shedeur uncomfortable. But uncomfortable situations, he's had plenty of them over the past year and a half.
Well, I think I've told you guys this before, just looking at this game a while ago. And that line, it's kind of hung around 7.5. Some places you could have got 8 in the middle of the summer. And I think it might go back up to 7, depending on where the money is, when the money picks up. But regardless of what the defense is going to do, and I think, Elijah, you and I talked about this maybe after the game upstairs, is Nebraska defensively, they were pretty basic. They didn't have to bring pressure against a quarterback. The only time that really Nebraska got on their heels is when UTEP went just psycho tempo. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that was just for their touchdown. Nebraska didn't have a chance to breathe. And they didn't have a ton of busts. Hartzog, I hate the 10 yards off coverage, and he got burned for that on that touchdown. And he did not handle that well, but Nebraska tackled well in space again. My thing Saturday, and we've got plenty of time to talk about this, is let me just throw this out there. Nebraska's going to have to score points. Nebraska will have to score at least 4 touchdowns in that game offensively. Defensively, maybe they don't give up more than 2 touchdowns, but I think we also need to focus on Nebraska's got to put up some points because Colorado will get a couple of busts and they will get a couple of big plays. And that Hunter or Horn or Lester will make a play and it will be a big chunk play. And who knows how it ends up. But I think Nebraska has to score. But I don't think there was anything yesterday, guys. Defensively, I went, oh boy, Nebraska's in trouble. I will tell you that Nebraska, as Elijah just alluded to, that defensive line, whether they're playing Colorado's offensive line, UTEP's offensive line, or whoever else, that defensive line in Nebraska's got a chance to eat really well this year. I hope they get an NIL deal with a buffet because those guys are going to be full every Saturday.
They will be the difference in a lot of ball games. And that's their plan with some of those older guys coming back. I mean, that's why Ty Robinson came back. That's why Nash continued to work on his body. That's why Jamari, the vibe Jamari's had even this summer and into the fall camp and just some of his media sessions. I mean, they're all in a good headspace. How about Bayer? I mean, I love him kind of patrolling the middle on 3rd down at linebacker, and I love his aggressiveness and acceleration to the edge. And the thing that's not changed either, fellas, is Nebraska will have 3 or 4 or 5 dudes around the ball. They do a good job of getting off blocks, knowing the leverage, and doing wonderful work. Bullock, Elijah, you and I were watching Bullock go there and be a crazed man, a demolition derby expert, where he goes and sets the edge, shot put some dude on the edge trying to block him on one of those little bubbles, and then makes a tackle with his back. And he just backs in like he's boxing somebody out. So Nebraska's well coached, clearly on defense. They're flying around. They're playing confident and being in a Tony White system with as many starters back in a second year. That's going to be big for a game the caliber of Saturday night here against Colorado.
And I mentioned it like on my rewatch. I noticed the violence. And Schmidt, you said, I'll keep this quick, Bill, because I'll let you jump in. Right. Like you mentioned the fact that the defense did a good job getting off blocks. He wasn't getting off blocks. It was just running straight through blocks. Like, how many times do you see Bear
Tomato,
or Bullock
tomato, but yes,
have a 5'10" wide receiver outside trying to set the edge, and Bullock or Bear just runs right through him, or Buford or Tommy Hill? Like, it was throughout the entire defense. They were playing like the blockers weren't there, just run straight through him into the ball carrier. That's where the violence really stood out to me defensively, not to mention the fact that a lot of those defensive guys, whenever they had a chance to make a tackle, they weren't just making a tackle, they were making a point.
Don't you think that Saturday's game comes down to Colorado's offense and Nebraska's defense? That's the marquee matchup, and then the secondary is Nebraska's offense against Colorado's defense.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems to me, how does Nebraska get pressure on Shedeur Sanders, and how do they cover Horn and Hunter? Colorado's running game is not going to scare anybody. Colorado's offensive line, in terms of churning out yards, rushing the ball, is not going to scare anybody. So they've got to figure out a way to stop that front six of Nebraska in the 3-3-5, and keep people off of Sanders. Meanwhile, for Nebraska, it's how do you protect? And look, everybody loves Malcolm Hartzog, but he's 5'5", and he's going against a guy who's going to be a number 1 draft pick, whether it's as a defensive back or as a wide receiver. So that's where Tommy Hill comes into play. And then you got Joe Horn, who is every bit as good a receiver as there is in the country. So that kind of matchup that Colorado can exploit, I think, gives Nebraska fans pause about their offense and Nebraska's defense being the marquee battle of the day, the marquee chess match of the day, if you will.
Well, I think as the season unfolds, and whether it be yesterday or coming up on Saturday, is how soon Nebraska's opponents give up on the run game. That shows you how good that front seven is. Because Colorado ran the ball 16 times against North Dakota State for 42 yards, and they didn't run it very often. After a while, they just kind of gave up, and it turned into 7-on-7. And it was just, can North Dakota State cover wide receivers, and can Sanders make, those jaw-dropping throws that he has the ability to do? Like, how soon Saturday night does Colorado just give up on the run game? Does it happen first quarter, second quarter? Do they keep going at it to try in the third quarter? But I think that's a sign all season long, is how good that defensive line is for Nebraska, is how many teams they run into. They're like, okay, we just can't run the ball. We just can't. So we're going to have to throw it. So then Nebraska, do they just rush 3, drop 8? Do they dial up some packages? I think Tony White was really, really, I don't want to say conservative, but they didn't overthink things yesterday. Like, you're playing UTEP. You know that you have advantages in certain areas. You can just go and play basic football. And if you can win like that, just playing basic football, what can you do when you jazz it up a little bit? And I think that's where you start Saturday night against Colorado.
Well, it wasn't just winning with basic football. It was really dominating UTEP with basic football. I know there's been comments out there. The defense didn't look impressive. Well, you look at the end of the day, you got a safety, 2 interceptions. You only allowed 1 touchdown, and it was a long play. It wasn't a long drive. Like, that defense did not allow much all day playing basic defense. And I agree, Colorado's a different challenge. I think the question, as you kind of alluded to, Gary, is like, can they get home with 3 or 4? And then when they bring pressure, can they pick their times so that they don't get burnt on the back end? Because Colorado is a team, if they pick up the blitz, which they haven't shown the ability to do in any game really under Deion Sanders, but they can pick up a blitz. They have the weapons on the outside to really, really make you pay if you don't get home with that blitz. So I think that's going to be the key. Is it's not going to be blitzing every single play and making Shedeur uncomfortable in that way. It's going to be making Colorado's offensive line uncomfortable when you bring 3 or 4, and then really, really taking advantage when you do bring pressure.
And does Colorado take anything away from that 3-play touchdown drive? If we go ultra fast against the defense, that's what we're going to go do. And because UTEP tried to do that, I think, again in the second half, and it didn't work out quite as well. But that touchdown drive of 3 plays, is that a tell? Is that what Colorado and other teams decide to do? Well, if we play tempo on Nebraska so they can't get all those line changes in and playing 25 guys on defense again like they like to do, and we keep those guys on the field and we run them, is that what they're going to try and do on Saturday, and anybody else going forward? I don't know. Nebraska adjusted okay in the second half when UTEP tried to dial it up again, but Colorado certainly has the players to probably execute that more.
It's the Average Joe Sports Show Reaction Pod. We'll be doing this Sundays throughout the season. Like and subscribe on YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show. Follow on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Tell a buddy, Spotify and iTunes, where you can download the audio. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. One thing that you have to feel good about with Nebraska is the last couple of years under Rule, on top of what was inherited, that's now been developed, and what's been brought to town, is the talent level. That was on display last night, clearly yesterday with Dylan, with the portal acquisitions. And you have a team that has got to feel good and take a bit of a breath, not break their arm, patting themselves on the back, but they prepped, they trained, they went out and did what they were supposed to do in an impressive fashion. The poise, the confidence part of this equation, as we talk 2024, yesterday's a nice reward for this football team, and it'll carry with them no matter how tight next Saturday gets. You've got guys, we talk about Colorado's talent level, which is very real. Well, Nebraska has some of their own dudes that they're going to lean on and use, and that could be a problem for Colorado, not just on the defensive line, but it's going to be a problem for Colorado dealing with Dylan Raiola. It's going to be a problem for Colorado messing with Nebraska's two wideouts.
Well, okay, so I'm glad you bring that up, Schmitty, because and Colorado deserved their praise for the wide receivers. I mean, they will have, before the game kicks off, they will have the two best players on the field, Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Will that change when the game's over? Who knows? But those are two of the best players in college football. Nebraska has a deeper team. And wide receivers, we've already talked about the wide receivers for Colorado. Yesterday just kind of validated what we all have been thinking and hearing and now seeing. Nebraska's wide receivers are dudes. They have got a plethora of them that are all of different variety and different skill set. And I say this with a guy that I like a lot. Jalen Lloyd didn't seem to play a lot yesterday, but the guy that got a lot of buzz in the preseason was Jamal Banks. Jamal Banks, good wide receiver. I think we might need to adjust a little bit on this wide receiver group and start talking about Isaiah Nayor. Isaiah Nayor is a dude, and I'm not just basing it on his touchdown, which was they should show that to wide receivers in that film, because he was in man coverage and they pressed him a little bit. So he was right at the line of scrimmage. He won the line of scrimmage, got by the guy, was able to track the ball and in stride, then make the catch, keep his balance, and finish with a score. That's a hell of a play. And he kind of has been talked about, but not as much as Banks, because Nayor was injured. Isaiah Nayor healthy, we might have to readdress how we look at him. But Nebraska's wide receivers should get a lot of love because they have an abundance of different guys. Hell, look at Garrett Nelson. Garrett Nelson caught a pass. When he caught that pass, how many people immediately said, oh, yeah, man, he's athletic. He doesn't look like a freshman. I mean, a big dude out there that caught the ball by the sidelines. And to top it off, guys, you finally have a quarterback that can make throws to these wide receivers and can find them. How many times yesterday did Nebraska's wide receivers just go down and sit in the middle of coverage and they were wide open? And you had a quarterback that simply could play pitch and catch and throw from me to Elijah to Bill or Chris, just a simple pass and hit the guy in the middle of the field, and it's already 14 yards down the field.
It's nice. It's nice to have if you're Nebraska. And if you're able to do that, I mean, there's choices. You got difference makers, yes, with Nayor and Banks. But you've also got Bedoni. Let him get upfield, please, and throw him the ball, not laterally.
Not behind the line.
Yeah. You have, like to your point, Lloyd that can get you deep. That's nice. And the other part of this, too, that was comforting to see if you're a Nebraska fan, Nebraska did great on first down. Second down was 2nd and 5, 2nd and 6, 2nd and 3 most of the time. Their third down conversions, what'd they finish?
11 of 17.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were 11 of 17 on third down. And you had a couple of hairy situations that you converted, 3rd and long, a 3rd and 11, and then another 3rd and 12. But for the most part, you had your playbook. You could run or pass with that 3rd down. Nebraska, on a few of those 3rd downs, was able to go heavy on the 3rd and shorts and get some of those conversions with the run game. So your 3rd down work was well executed, and it was impressive. And I don't know what your 3rd down, you need to be 50% in these big games on 3rd down, but you need to be in 3rd and manageable. What's your down and distance? It was how often was 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 8 the reality a year ago? And that wasn't what at least game 1 looked like.
And that's a credit to the execution, but it's also a credit to the balance in that game plan with Marcus Satterfield. It wasn't a take the reins off Dylan type moment where they're throwing the ball around 40 times. They let the run game get lathered up, but I don't think UTEP knew on any particular play, no matter what the down and distance was, except maybe 2nd and 30, it's going to be a pass. It's going to be a run. That was a defense that was kept guessing all game long because Nebraska was just as willing to throw the ball on 1st down as they were to run it. And they were just as willing to run the ball on 3rd and 3 as they were to throw the ball on 3rd and 3. Like, I don't think UTEP ever knew exactly what the offense was going to be doing in that game. And that's a credit to the offensive line, being able to keep Dylan safe and being able to get a push up front. But it's also credit to Marcus Satterfield coming out with a great game plan and just saying, hey, we like our ability to run. We like our ability to pass. We're going to be balanced. And it sounds so easy, but you see a lot of teams, whenever they think they have a dude at quarterback, you know what? We're going to keep this guy happy. We're going to let him throw the ball around 35 times a game. That's our best chance to win. I think Dylan Raiola, based on what I saw yesterday, is Nebraska's best chance to win football games this year. That being said, you still got to have the balance, and it was a great first start yesterday from a play calling point of view.
Yeah, don't you think, like Bill, don't you think when we've seen this too much of late, Nebraska didn't overthink yesterday. You're going against a defensive line that averages 270 pounds. You like your offensive line, and I thought, by the way, I thought Ben Scott was really good yesterday. I thought Mazuka was really good. Nebraska's interior offensive line is sneaky, pretty talented, but they didn't overthink things yesterday. You know, Satterfield didn't try and get fancy. He took what UTEP was going to give them because he has weapons that can execute those plays, and they didn't try and get fancy. And as a result, that's why I think it looked like, man, they were in a rhythm from the kick.
There were so many other running plays, and Schmidt and I were talking about this last night, that you didn't see any really spectacular runs. There was the one that the 42-yarder that Emmett Johnson busted off, and I think Emmett Johnson is so underrated. But that was a great play call. It was a great audible. Everything about that play worked. But for the most part, most of the runs were in that 4 to 6 yards range. There wasn't anything spectacular. There were a couple of plays. Maybe Ramir Johnson could have busted one had he gone right, not left, and into a crowd. But it was, and that's part of the reason why it wasn't 2nd down and really long. If they ran on 1st down, it became 2nd down and 5 or 6. But a lot of guys got their hands on the ball. They got a lot of, like, everybody had 8 carries or so, as we kind of expected it to be. I think one thing, we talked about Satterfield. I think one thing that really helps this year, and look, I don't know the intricacies of the coaching dynamic with this staff, like maybe in yesteryear, but I think Satterfield having the OC job and coaching tight ends, and then having somebody dedicated specifically to the quarterbacks like Glenn Thomas, communicate the game plan so that Thomas can work directly with Dylan Raiola and communicate it so you're not having to worry about everybody as an OC. Here's the game plan, Glenn. Get your guys ready. And I think that works really well for the dynamic of this coaching staff. And everybody's got to be attentive because, a lot of guys had a chance to play. A lot of guys got a chance to carry the ball. A lot of guys caught passes. I don't know how deep they went on the offensive line, but I know there were a lot of guys who played yesterday who did not have numbers on the roster, and they were out there. So, so just going all the way down, but that Satterfield is able to communicate the offensive game plan to assistant coaches who can work directly with their units and then make it all work. And yesterday was a perfect season opener in that regard.
Let me ask a question to the room here really fast. Did any running back impress you enough yesterday to think they're going to be the feature back against Colorado? Does Nebraska pull out the same game plan? Where does Dante Dowdell stand after the fumble? that could be the most interesting offensive question moving forward.
The running back that impressed me fumbled the football, and
yes,
because I love the combination of speed and power with Dante. I also love the Nebraska treasure known as George Darlington that we get to sit next to.
you got to share the quote that he uttered out loud.
It was wonderful, and George has been a friend. We'll go have tacos. I love George. George at halftimes saying, "Yeah, you're welcome. I brought Papa Raiola here 30 years ago to Nebraska. Now we got his kid, but George is down the hall, well, just down the row in the media section. He's like, you guys remember Bill Shakespeare? Yeah. You remember the famous Shakespeare quote? It's better to not be born than to fumble the football. That was 2 seconds. So here comes Emmett Johnson, hell of an audible by Raiola, and they check into that 42-yard run. Nebraska eventually scores. And then George is like, hey, what time's the bus leave for Oregon? You better be on it. He's no filter, and it's glorious. I mean, he's the best.
So
we had him in studio a couple weeks ago, and his football facts class he's done for 40 years. So just shout out George, darling.
Guys, the running back situation was kind of interesting, and on the pregame show we were doing yesterday, I went with Dowdell. Dowdell has had a really good fall camp. I mean, he's worked his way into the mix. And the only reason that Rahmir started yesterday is they went situational, what they were going to run on the first series, so Rahmir was in the game. But I still think Emmett, it's 1A, 1B, and it's Emmett and Dowdell. But Dowdell, to me, was the most impressive running back. But I give credit to Nebraska on something they said. If you fumble the ball, you're going to have a ticket, and you're going to be standing on the sidelines watching the game. That's what happened. Nebraska, by the way, responded quickly after that. Couple of scores, safety, 3 and out, boom, that game was over. But Dowdell looked the best, but, man, he fumbled, and they said, we're on to the next person. Gabe looked good. Rahmir looked good. Emmett looked good. Even the guys that came in after them
Mazuka
looked okay. Mm-hmm. They've gotten reps in. You can tell that when you play 106 guys and it doesn't turn into Helter Skelter, or the Benny Hill Show, or an absolute circus, that they run a lot of quality reps. I had to reach all of our demos. They run a lot of reps that are quality reps, not throwaway reps in practice. That, if you want more reps, you got to be able to, that first rep, you got to look like you know what you're doing. But I like the fact that if they tell you, we can't fumble the football, and if you do, there's consequences, even if you're playing well. We saw that yesterday. But I'd go right back to the well, and Dowdell would be my guy against Colorado once again.
My take, I think it's going to be 1A, 1B next week. Emmett being the 1A, Dowdell being the 1B, and you give Dowdell another opportunity to prove you right. Because I don't think he necessarily proved you right. He looked really good, but that fumble is going to loom large, I think, in the room. You can't have that, especially with as well as your quarterback's playing. Like, you can't be giving the ball away inside the 10-yard line. Your passing attack, I still think, is your best chance to score points this year. So you can't have a rushing attack that's going to fumble the football, because there will be interceptions from your freshman quarterback. There will be turnovers from that spot. You can't compound that and add to it with a running back room that fumbles. I think Dowdell gets another shot. I think he's 1B next week. I think Emmett is 1A. And then I think you found a guy with Gabe Irvin. You found a role for him. Just put him in I formation, 1st and goal, 2nd and goal, 3rd and goal, 3rd and short, 2nd and short. You got to roll there, because that dude can be his own blocker. He can run through somebody's face, fall forward, and turn a 2-yard gain into a 3 or a 4-yard gain. He does that really well. That's kind of how I see the running back room. Where does Rahmir fit in? Not quite sure. Probably best as a pass catcher. He might be the odd man out in this room, which sucks, because I'm a big Rahmir Johnson guy, and we'll see. But him and Emmett do a very similar role within that offense, and I think Emmett does a little better than Rahmir.
Rahmir, out of that one-back set, the cutback ability, you saw that. You saw some really nice lanes with Rahmir's speed. He might be that home run threat out of a run game. out of a run set, but he's the pass catcher for sure.
Yeah, I would rather see him catching a pass behind the line to pick up some yards as opposed to Thomas Fidone.
Yeah, I think all of what you guys said about him being a pass catcher, I worry about his vision as a running back in finding the hole. He had a chance yesterday to bounce right, and he could have. I mean, Ramirez got some speed. He would have housed it. He would have hit his head on the goalpost. Instead, he never saw the hole, and it was kind of right in front of him. Instead, he went left. There's the other back to Emmett. And, I mean, good on Emmett. He's come a long way, and he's going to be a vital part of this offense. If Emmett Johnson had home run speed, think about what that would do. He just doesn't – he can get to a hole and he can get downfield, but he can't pull away from guys. God, if he had that, what that would do. But they have 4 reliable running backs. They just, I think we might go most of the year where there's no separation, and they all at some point become situational guys of, hey, this is what we need. We know this guy's going to hold on to the ball, and then just play it by ear. But back to something that Elijah said, that's where you can do that when you have the availability of the forward pass and the success of the forward pass.
Let's talk return game for a moment, right? Because that was another nice aside for Nebraska on special teams. You got Barney that is, man, he's going to take one back this year from a kickoff.
Guys, what if he gets broken in half? And I'm being sarcastic here a little bit because I like him a lot, but man, he's an itty bitty dude.
Someone in our post game show yesterday said, "Someone get Ja'Cory Barney a sandwich."
Get him a meatball sub. But hey, Barney hits that and just flies. And you didn't have super wow punt returns, but you had a couple that got you 10, 12 yards. Nebraska's starting field position yesterday, you had a run, fellas, where you started the 37, the 41, the 50, because you were able to do something with the return game. And only a couple of times did you start inside your own 20. So Nebraska had shorter fields to go, which seems like, yeah, but that's not been the case. And I like the step forward that you have with IGC as a punt returner. Nebraska has emphasized that this offseason. It wasn't a hindrance yesterday. It was something that contributed to the win subtly with better field position. It was starting out on a kickoff return with Barney hitting that seam and flying. The pop pass to Barney, too, was fun. I mean, he's a young guy from that 305, man, that Rule smiles about. So I just had to shout out the return game a little bit, and it's something that you want to beat Colorado under the lights. That's going to be part of the formula. You're going to need some help from all 3 phases, clearly, but that special teams at least showed up a little bit yesterday for me.
So you're saying that Nebraska has moved on from the era in which they led the nation in Oliver Martin fair catches at the 10-yard line?
Yes.
This is a different era of return game now that we're seeing.
It's a far cry from the DPE. But
Bill, here's the reality of it. Nebraska yesterday in their first game of the season, what are they, 23 yards away from eclipsing their punt return total from last year?
No. That's so bad.
While we talk special teams here, though, the return game looked like it should. I'm not willing to go out on a limb here and say Ja'Cory Barney.
It's special. I'm not saying it's special. I'm just saying it was some icing. All right.
That has I tweeted this out. They have a hint of players that are back there on kicks or punts that at least could break one.
Yes. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say they're going to break one because, hey, I'm going to have to believe that when I see it. But
I think Nebraska's return game is more purposeful.
It looks competent. I agree with Gary. It looked like it has a chance to break one this year. And that's what competent return games look like for most Power 4 football programs. You have a guy back there and you have a return setup, the blocking in front, that gives you an opportunity to house one. It gives you an opportunity to have good field position. That's what it should look like. I want to go to kickoff, though. Do we have concerns there? I think Hull settled in as the game went on, but you kick one out of bounds. You have one, from what I could see, mishit, like little chip shot that settled at the 20-yard line, and you had one of the upmen call a fair catch and knee it at the 20. He settled in after that moment, but do we have concerns about the kickoff game?
My God, it must have been a great game yesterday for Nebraska if we're breaking down kickoff concerns at this stage. So good on the Huskers.
Now, there is a concern that I have with special teams that isn't like, oh, okay, we got to find something to pick on. I'm going to throw this out there, and then I want to answer something Elijah just said. Marco Ortiz might be the guy that was missed the most yesterday. You guys know who Marco Ortiz is?
Long snapper.
Is he related to Tony?
Keep an eye on Nebraska on special teams and their snapping. If you go back and watch the game, so if you were in the stadium early yesterday, they had all kinds of issues snapping the football on special teams. A couple of times it showed up, didn't come back to bite them, but it showed up on special teams. But back to the kickoff. And I think it was important that Alvano got out there to kick a field goal. I would have been very curious if they had a drive. They actually got a first down and in the end zone, but they had a drive that could have ended like at the 25-yard line if Hull would have come out for a field goal. But here's the thing I don't know, guys, and probably we need more of a clarification. Maybe you guys know. So Rule said this Thursday, kind of in passing about their kickoffs, is he doesn't want them to kick it into the end zone. Now, he doesn't want them to kick it out of bounds, but he doesn't want them to kick it into the end zone because they're trying to steal a possession. What did he mean by that? And then you look at what happened yesterday.
Well, yeah, it's kind of what Walden was talking about coming into the game, where Nebraska's kickoff unit, I think the quote from him was they run down like a bunch of screaming banshees. I think that was his quote on the kickoff game. If you can chip that thing up, we're seeing it in the NFL this year with new kickoff rules. You have to land in between the 20 and the goal line. If you can chip that thing up and land it on the 1 yard line with good hang time, you give your kickoff team a chance to get down there and either A, stop a return man inside the 15-yard line, setting up your defense, which can then get you your offensive possession, your midfield, or whenever a guy runs it out, there's always the possibility if your guys are running down like banshees, that collision could lead to something good happening, whether it be a fumble, whatever it may be. That's my read on that, is if you can get that thing to land inside the 5 yard line, guys are going to return it, and you give your kickoff guys a chance to go and make a play. And the way they ran down the field yesterday, there was one play where it was Gage Stinger coming in, making a fantastic play around the 15-yard line on kickoff. You give yourselves an opportunity to have something good happen. If you trust your kickoff team, something good can happen more often than something bad can happen whenever the return comes out, which is different than what we've seen from Nebraska in recent years.
Well, I think you also if you can place the ball right, and I've always said this forever on onside kicks, is why is every onside kick 10 yards and try to recover it? Why don't you pop it up and land it at, somewhere between the 35 and the 25 and let the ball fall on the turf, and then everybody just dogpile on it and see who comes up with it there, because typically that's where there's a wasteland of bodies. There's nobody there. And so I think if you're able to pop it up and drop it down inside the 20 and kick it away from a return man, wherever they're set up, and then you run down there and you try to jump on a loose ball. There you're stealing a possession there, or at least you're pinning him back so that the return doesn't hurt you. And as Elijah said, an offense that has to set up inside the 20 is much different than the way it approaches a possession when it sets up inside, around the 35 or something like that. So I've always said onside kick it, pop it up, and then go get it and find an area where ain't nobody are, and just dive on it.
Just don't do it after you're up 10 points.
Sorry. I mean, I think of all this talk, we've hit on a lot of the position groups. Nebraska had a really good fall camp. They didn't have a lot of idle time or wasted days, it appeared, that they put in the work. And so in game one, they looked like they were well coached. It didn't look like I watched UCLA last night against Hawaii. It looked like UCLA just showed up on Monday to get ready for a game. They were sloppy. They were disorganized. They were struggling against Hawaii. Don't think about the opponent yesterday. Just focus on Nebraska. That looked like a team that had a good camp, that were prepared. They were focused. They had drilled down on a lot of things that they do well. And there was really nothing that surprised them in that game, because I'll go back to the touchdown and the tempo. guys, we all saw with our eyes, that was lightning speed. I mean, they ran a play, they got a big pickup, they got inside of the red zone, and I bet within 7 seconds after that previous play was over, they were snapping the ball again. Nobody was ready for that. I mean, Nebraska had a couple of guys that hadn't even put their hand in the dirt yet. They were still standing up when UTEP snapped the ball. So that aside, I thought that whole team had a good month of a good camp because they were ready to play. They were well schooled. I thought their scouting report was good and they didn't overthink things. And I think that's a good sign moving forward, is that they are trying to make the week tougher than Saturday. And if they can get to that, then man, you got a really good chance to turn the corner.
You know, one thing I had a difficult time getting used to, I shouldn't say difficult time, but I was curious as to how it was going to look, because that's the first game I've seen Nebraska on that sideline. It's the first time anybody's seen Nebraska on that sideline in decades and decades and decades. But as the game went on, and next Saturday is a night game, so it'll be a little bit different, but you can see how different it is when you're over there in the shadows of the press box and you look over at UTEP and the sun is still shining pretty bright, and they're shading, they're trying to shade their eyes, and it's a little warm over there. You think, gosh, why didn't they do this a long, long time ago? I'm sure it was a lot more comfortable on Nebraska's sideline than it was for UTEP, and I'm thinking, why didn't they do this back in the day? But good move. I think it was a good move for Nebraska to do it.
Respect for Matt Rule being able to have the confidence to rip up the things that have been standards at Nebraska for years now and bring in his own system. Not an easy thing to do. And a lot of times there's been other coaches who do little things, they get pushback. He's just done his way. And I think Husker Nation has confidence in him, like, going to go natural grass in the field. We're going to flip the sidelines, like all this stuff that Matt Rule says, you know what, it's my way or the highway. Respect to him for lack of a better term, having the balls to come in and do what he wants to do at such a historic and tradition-laden place such as Nebraska.
So let me ask you guys and everybody that's tuning in live here on our Sunday edition of the Average Joe Sports Show. And I give credit to my colleague Connor Happer at 1620 The Zone in Omaha on that radio station, which is a fine radio station if you happen to be in Omaha, is on the postgame show. He brought up a question, and I'd be curious what you guys think and everybody else. When was the last time you sensed the confidence in the fan base like you do on a Sunday morning after being 1-0? Because it's not just, hey, here comes Colorado. The confidence of Nebraska fans right now is real. When was the last time Nebraska fans were as confident as they are right now, you think? Or you guys individually?
I've got to go back to the Bo era, and I have to look at the Sunday morning after Nebraska's win at Oklahoma State, where they won a shootout. That was on the heels of the Red Out Round the World Texas loss. That was a freaking trap snake pit game after, you built this build up to get even with Texas from 2009. And you have Team Magic go out there and throw for 300 and run for 150. I mean, it was, and as much as Bo prided his defense on being, a high-level defensive squad, he knew this thing was going to be a shootout. Like early on in that ball game, they faked the punt. I mean, Henry just kept it and kept on rolling. So to me, that's one of the most underrated wins in the last 15 years. But okay, this team, they screwed the pooch on the Texas opportunity, but that was a real opportunity to go back to back with losses. Have your season shot to hell. And while 2010 didn't end the way they wanted it, they responded. So saying, okay, this is a good football team, they'll be in it all the way to the end. They had a tough night in A&M in November that same year, but I got to go back to 2010 for me. That I remember that game, and I'm not saying UTEP is the equivalent of a ranked Okie State team with Blackman on the outside. No, but I think the confidence is real because of who you got at quarterback, what you got on defense, and just the balance you have with that offensive setup.
The confidence comes from the way in which this team plays, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, it's violence. That's how Husker fans want their team to play. You have that that swagger, that mean streak about this team. You can already see it. Some confidence comes from that. Obviously, it's going to come from Raiola. In terms of performances at the quarterback position at Nebraska, like that was one of the more confidence instilling performances I've seen. Dating back to the game I'm going to go to, whenever I think the feel good nature of Husker Nation on a Sunday morning, different time, different context around the game, but Western Kentucky 2010, Team Magic's first game. Whenever he stepped in, Nebraska had zero semblance of an offense in the 2009 Big 12 championship game. And 2010, you turn it around, and Taylor Martinez is your starting quarterback. Do I have my years right here? I believe I do.
Yes.
Steps out there and absolutely torches the Western Kentucky defense. And Husker fans say, you know what? They had the defense last year. The defense looks good today, but you finally have a weapon on offense that can get you points, get you over the hump, get you to another conference championship game and win the conference championship. That was the feeling among Husker Nation after that Western Kentucky game. I remember walking out of the stadium and just the smiles and the laughter and how good of a time everyone was having kind of felt like yesterday, where it's that feeling of, you know what, there is something with this team. And I'm not saying Nebraska right now is as good as that 2010 football team was, but that's kind of the same mood I feel. And it's helped by the fact that after years and years of heartache and suffering, the bar is lower this year for what Husker fans are going to be satisfied with when compared to 2010. But the feel-good nature on a Sunday morning, I have to go back to that Western Kentucky game, because that was a game that I think a lot of Husker fans said, oh, Nebraska's back now. They have an offense and they have a defense.
I think I have to go back to 1990-05. After Nebraska beat Oklahoma State in its season opener, like 65-0 or whatever the score was. I'm pretty sure Nebraska was pretty confident as to how the 1995 season was going to go. 96, not so much. 97, we didn't win a national championship in 96. And then in 1998, Troy Edwards and Tim Rattay came to town with Louisiana Tech and Frank Solich's debut and put up about 500 yards passing. And I think everybody was a little nervous after that. Then, of course, I'm still not over the 4-year case of the flu in the Callahan era. But if I'm thinking, if there was ever a time when Nebraska was pretty confident how the season was going to play out, it was 1995. So I'm going to dial it way back in the time machine to them. But I know people are feeling pretty good right about now. Now, had Nebraska gotten a chance to play Akron in 2018, maybe they would have been feeling confident that Scott Frost was the right hire, but the storm clouds came in and became a metaphor for the Scott Frost era. So I'm going way back. If you want supreme confidence after one win, 1995.
Fair enough. Sharpie, what's your year?
So there was, and it's funny because I brought this up earlier about the last time Nebraska, had a big blowout at halftime. Like after that Northwestern game in 21, I was like, okay, things that have been said for a couple of years kind of came to fruition in this game. And then you remember what the game was immediately following that. That was Michigan. 32-29, and Nebraska was in that game to the end. Maybe a little bit then, but I have to go a ways back. And a lot of it has to do with the kind of quarterback you have that instills confidence. That don't have a quarterback that is good enough to get you beat, but have a quarterback that is good enough to single-handedly win you some games. And I still think Dylan's away from that. He made a couple of throws yesterday that against better defenses are going to get picked. And he's going to learn from throwing the ball sidearm into coverage or some other decisions he made. But the decisions that he made right greatly outweighed of anything that you went, yeah, you shouldn't do that. So when you have somebody that can do that and you have guys that are surrounding him and it looked good, an opening game, and it wasn't sloppy and there weren't a ton of penalties and you ended up as a +1, it's tough to find – the Taylor Martinez, those kind of things, that confidence, and that's going back a ways. So I think yesterday kind of told you that stuff that has been said by the head coach and the players is not manufactured, that there's something there real. They just another week to validate that they're headed in the right direction. And don't say, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Say, you know what? I'm finally realizing what good football looks like, because didn't didn't after watching yesterday, guys, we have to adjust how we look at Nebraska's offense, how they run it, and how we look at good football around here again?
It's just been a while since you'd seen it.
Mhm.
And you won't forget it as a Nebraska fan, what good football looks like, but you've just been longing for it because it's been so inconsistent or it's been non-complimentary, right? You have one part of the unit that's pretty good, the defense a year ago, or okay, they can throw the football, they can't run the football, or yeah, they're too soft, they don't tackle, they don't hit, they're not physical, there's zero depth when your stud goes down. We got to lean on a guy named Adrian to do it all. I mean, there's been so many different situations, to your point, Gary, about what good football is and what it looks like. And you've got a coach, you've got a staff, you've got recruiting, you have development, you have depth. I mean, Kai Wallen, for the love of God, he's a young player that they were kind of raving about a year ago that they redshirted. You didn't see a whole lot of. He came in however many snaps he got a pressure, got
forced a turnover.
Got a TFL.
He gets what, a hockey assist on that turnover, right?
Yes, right. So I mean, he shoots through, and that's your third team nose guard. Okay, so that's just it feels like it's going right. Some final thoughts here. Go ahead.
Can we give it? Yeah. Well, as we wrap things up, can we give a congratulations out to all of the bar owners in the Haymarket who were serving happy drinks well into the late into the evening last night, as opposed to being shut down around 5 o'clock after a home loss. So good on all those folks at the Single Barrel and the Tavern where Schmidt and I tend to frequent after a game. It might be a profitable season for those folks down there.
Ran into our long lost pal. Shout out Johnny C. It was good to see him.
Yep.
Just a word of celebration in advance for next Saturday night. If you're a big Red fan, the bar, our friend Seth and Gregor's is where our post game is going to be at the bar right after Nebraska, Colorado. It will
Godspeed.
Be glorious. It will be absolutely glorious one way or the other. And game balls, final thoughts, and Sharpie, we'll let you hand it out.
I think I will give a game ball to the entire program.
Okay.
There's a lot of expectations this year, and they came out, and for the first game they still have some work to do, like a good amount of work. They look like a program that's headed in the right direction with an influx of talent. They've got more talent than they've had in a while, and they've got depth. Think about it, guys. Nebraska has a Cam Lenhart, a Prince Will, and a Riley Van Poppel backups on defense. Those guys probably would find a starting role at some other Big Ten schools. So the whole thing looks and feels different. And now you have to keep validating that. But I would say to the whole program, I think they had a really good camp. They came out, they didn't dance with UTEP. A lot of scores around the country. Ohio State Akron was 17-6. It might end up 52-6, but it was 17-6. Outside of 7-7, Nebraska wasn't in a danger zone yesterday, and I think that's a sign of progress. So I would give a game ball out to the entire program for game number 1.
Billy D.
Well, last night I gave it to Tristan Alvano because he's been in my spotlight all camp, and good on Matt Rule to get him the kick. I'm sure that UTEP understood what the scenario was. They probably texted, "Look, I got to have a kicker," and UTEP sideline understood that. So good on him. But because we brought him up earlier in the show, I'm going to give it to Crazy Uncle George Darlington for his willingness to go out to Hawaii and recruit back in the 1990s and the latter stages of the decade and go convince Dominic Raiola and all of his buddies to come to Nebraska, and whatever sell job he put on him and got him here and developed a love for Nebraska football and the Raiola family. Good on the College of Journalism and Mass Communications as well to sell the Raiola family on a quality education at the University of Nebraska. But George, thank you for taking one for the team to go out to Hawaii and do some recruiting and bring in the Raiola family to Nebraska.
You too can do Sunday morning podcasts. Elijah, what do you got?
Last night I gave the game ball to the offensive line as a whole. I'm not going to take it away from them by any means. I
can't.
They went out. You're never going to have a perfect game on the offensive line. Those guys were solid. They ran the ball well. They protected Raiola. Loved it. But I do want to give an additional game ball out to Husker Nation. All the Husker fans over the past 10 years that have continued showing up to football games for shitty football teams. Let's be honest. It was bad football you were watching for 10 years at Memorial Stadium. You kept showing up. You kept on selling it out. Yesterday, you show up after all the years of heartbreak. You don't let it get you down. They were loud. They were proud all day long. And guess what? At the end of the day, there is a product on the field that is going to be worth watching moving forward. You made it. After 10 years of just bad stuff. You could even argue 20. There is a team on the field that I saw enough from yesterday to tell me, hey, it's going to be worth watching. Is it going to be 10-2 this year, 11-1? I don't know. Probably not. But is it going to be worth watching? Is it going to be worth turning on the TV? Is it going to be worth showing up to Memorial Stadium and catching a game for, paying $50 for a ticket, if not more? Yes, you have made it. Game Ball Husker Nation after everything you've been through.
Hey, this is, you know how things are different around here?
We're on a good mood.
Elijah, it took 65 minutes for the show to drop an explicitive, and it came out of Elijah. Usually it's Bill. Bill's like, I got a sailor's mouth. So that's an improvement.
I thought he could have reached late until afternoon. My gosh, Sunday morning.
But that should be the last time that you refrain from using salty language, because this is not the week to avoid that. This is what makes college sports and rivalries, whether they be concocted or not. They have characters. They have past history. This is not a week to be kind around the state of Nebraska. This is a week to lean into it and realize how important a football game it is for the program, the fan base, and moving forward. Because, Colorado's beat Nebraska 3 straight times. You cannot avoid that with 3 different head coaches. But this is the one you remember because it's the last one. And trust me, prime time, big-time players. Nebraska hasn't always matched the moment. They get an opportunity in their house where it will be, I don't even know what a word to find of what that place will be like, but you cannot start on Saturday. You must start all week in leading up to this game and then just let it out on Saturday because that's where we are at. And Nebraska's put themselves in a position to have this game mean more than just, let's get Colorado back. It means having a voice moving forward in this year's edition of college football.
Full of fury will be Saturday.
There's 3 of us here that remember the 90s. Yeah. And Colorado created this rivalry against Nebraska, and they had an ounce of success. But there was nothing like when Colorado came here, because there were dudes on the field on both sides, what those games were like. But most importantly, how much of an impact the people sitting in the seats had. And they will have an impact because you will have celebrities on the sidelines. For God's sake, you're going to have Warren Sapp back as a Colorado assistant on the game that they honor a lot of the 94 team. You will have other celebrities. Remember, big names like to follow Colorado. The big names that like Nebraska will show up. It will be combustible that night. And it's one of those moments where I think one program would like to win the game. That's CU. Another program needs to win that game, and that's Nebraska.
Amen. My game ball going to go to Satterfield. Got his quarterback in rhythm. Got the run game dialed up. Well balanced. Didn't overthink it. To your point, Gary, used his weapons. And we'll be back later on in the week. Another Average Joe as we get you all ready for them Buffs. For Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, thanks for tuning in to a live Average Joe Sports Show. Have a good rest of your weekend.